Gordon Carrera. Well, Glenn Greenwald is the journalist responsible for releasing the information leaked by Edward Snowden. He joins us from Rio. Good evening, Glenn Greenwald. First of all, why should you be the arbiter about what is in the public interest and what is vital to national security?
I'm not the arbiter of that. I work with a huge number of Guardian editors and some of the most experienced national security journalists in the world. And journalism, which is designed to serve as a check on those in power, is about shining light on what those people who are in power are doing that they try and hide from the public. And those are the judgments that all journalism requires every single day.
58,000 British documents, we know, at least as many, presumably, from the NSA. You heard perhaps David Oman there, from the former GCHQ chief, saying, not even Philby, Burgess and McLean had such an impact as this, and this is a car crash coming.
Well, this idea that there's 58,000 documents just because the UK government said it, I would hope that we've learned the lesson after the Iraq War that government claims are not tantamount to the truth. But I think the broader point is that it isn't how many documents The Guardian or other newspapers around the world possess. The question is, what is it that they're doing with those documents? And in every single article that we've published and in every single article that we will publish, we have very carefully gone over every single line of every single document, and not one line, not one comma of what we published could even plausibly be said to damage national security. It's all about informing people in democracies of what their governments are doing. But
what you have shown is it where the huge metadata connections. Now, those connections are often made to track would-be terrorists. As a very result of those being known to people all over the world, terrorists, would-be terrorists, change their tactics. So it is very possible that you actually, by your actions, make it easier for terrorists to understand how to evade all the checks that are made on them online.
That's completely ludicrous. First of all, the premise of your question is entirely false. We've shown much more than just the mere collection of metadata. We've shown all sorts of invasions into the content of communications between innocent people having conversations with one another online through emails, online chat, collection of their browsing history. The idea that terrorists didn't know, that the United States and UK governments were trying to monitor their communications is laughable. Of course, every terrorist who's capable of tying their own shoes has long known that the UK and US governments are trying to monitor their communications. The only thing we've informed people of is that the spying system is aimed at them.
But what I want to ask you is, how can you be sure that your actions have not made it easier for terrorists to operate? You can't be sure of that. You can't prove a negative like that, can you?
Well, I don't know why you're asking me to prove a negative.
Well, I'm just simply saying that
the way that human beings reason and that journalists make decisions is that you weigh all of the competing evidence as rationally as you can. And we know that the evidence that we are disclosing to the world is not about spying on terrorists that they don't already know about, but spying on innocent human beings. And I would like to find a journalist or a human being who says, I would rather remain ignorant about what my government is doing in a democracy. That is not how a healthy democracy functions.
But do you think it will be such a shock that spies actually do spy, or do you think actually for a majority of the population perhaps it actually might be quite reassuring? They might actually feel quite safe.
I think it's a shock that government officials lie to the face of journalists who don't seem to mind very much. So, for example, in that segment that you just played, you had people defending the GCHQ on the grounds that this is only about terrorism or pedophiles. And yet, much of the reporting that we've done proves that's a lie. We reported that the GCHQ and NSA are spying on Petrobras, the large Brazilian oil company that funds social programs in Brazil. Are there terrorists in Petrobras? Or that they're spying on the Organization of American States when they're negotiating economic agreements? Are there pedophiles at the OAS? So I think that the job of journalists is to prevent people in power from lying to the people over whom they're ruling. And while some of this may be devoted to terrorists, huge amounts of this system are devoted to innocent people in the population whose privacy is being eroded.
There's vast amounts of material I gather that you have that still has not been revealed at the moment. I mean, do you have this? Is it in your bedroom in Rio?
I'm not going to talk about what's in my bedroom, and I'm not going to talk about the security measures. What I will say,
but I mean, do you have? I mean, it's possible that presumably you have a little.
Let me just.
No, but people want to know.
I'll be happy to.
I'll tell you why people want to know. They want to know, I suppose, that how can you guarantee that the material you have, you can keep safe? I mean, the thing is, could it possibly be on a memory stick in your pocket? I mean, people want to know how you think you can keep things safe.
Well, I'll be happy to answer that. That was what I was about to tell you when you interrupted. There's only one group of people who has lost control of huge amounts of what they claim are important documents, and those people are called the GCHQ and the NSA. The GCHQ took documents that they claim are so very sensitive and put them onto a system at the NSA that tens of thousands of people have access to. We at The Guardian have protected all of our data with extremely advanced methods of encryption, and our documents have remained completely secure. We have not lost control of any of our material. That remains entirely secure.
The reason I ask that is because when your partner and, as it were, I suppose, collaborator, David Miranda, was apprehended, in the evidence, it said that actually what he was doing, he was carrying around password material written on a piece of paper beside the encrypted files. To a lot of people, that is not very worrying about how careful you are about security.
Right. Well, I guess I need to give you the reminder again that as a journalist, you should be aware that simply because the government makes a claim, especially when they're making that claim in the middle of a lawsuit while they're being sued for violating the law, one should not go around assuming that claim to be factually true.
So
the
it's
UK
wrong.
government's
So you're
claim
denying
that my
it.
partner was carrying a It was a lie. The idea that he was carrying a password that allowed access to those documents and to let people open those documents and read them is absolutely false. The only ones who have lost control of the documents through horrific operational security is the GCHQ and the NSA. He did not have the password. And I will show you the proof of that. Just look at the affidavit that they filed that said we have to keep this material because it's all, quote, heavily encrypted, and we've only been able to reconstruct 75 of those documents. They filed an affidavit themselves proving that what they've convinced you of is actually a lie.
Well, after what happened to David Miranda when he was held and so forth, and as his partner, that must have been very distressing for you. You then said, I'll be far more aggressive in my reporting from now. I'm going to publish many more documents. I'm going to publish things on England too. I have many documents on England's spy system. I think they'll be sorry for what they did. Is there something coming down the pipeline? Because that's a number of months ago now.
Right. Actually, it was a few weeks ago. I think it was 4 weeks ago. And since then, there has been a report, as I said, on Fantastico about GCHQ spying on Petrobras, which caused a major diplomatic scandal with Brazil. But that interview that you're referencing is in Portuguese, and the translation you're reading from is very poor. What I was asked was, how do you think the British government's behavior, both toward The Guardian and toward your partner, will be viewed? And I said, it'll be looked at in most democracies where press freedoms are protected, unlike in the UK, as a very thuggish form of behavior and an attack on journalism that will make them look quite bad. I think it's contrary to their interests, and they'll come to regret it. It had nothing to do with vowing to do revenge journalism, as some tried to depict. But we will continue absolutely aggressively reporting on both the GCHQ and the NSA. But
do you see why, however inappropriate the translation was, that it was seen very much as you acting as a campaigner and an activist? You talked about revenge journalism being the wrong way of describing it, but you can see how people think that.
No, I'll tell you my view of journalism very clearly. My view of journalism is that the more people in power abuse that power, the more accountability and transparency they prove that they need through journalism. And so when I see a government like the UK barge into the newsroom of the newspaper with which I work and demand that they destroy their computers, something you would expect to hear in Iran or Russia or China, or when they detain someone they think is working with a journalist under a terrorism law for 9 hours and basically acknowledge through the media that they're doing it to be intimidating, that is a government that is attacking press freedom and abusing their power and showing that they need more transparency. And that's the role of journalism. So,
Glenn Greenwald, do you fear for your safety?
That's not something I focus on. The Brazilian government has actually offered me and provided security, and I'm perfectly content and with the situation I'm in. Lots of journalists are in difficult positions all the time, so it's not something I think about.
But do you feel you could travel further afield? For example, do you feel you could travel, one, to the United States, and two, do you feel comfortable about traveling to Britain?
Well, I am going to return to the United States as soon as I decide that it makes sense to do so, because unlike in the UK, there's actually a constitutional guarantee of a free press. And I think lots of even former Obama Justice Department officials have said it's unthinkable that the Obama administration would prosecute the journalists in this case. The UK is a different story, because that government has proven that they are willing to very thuggishly run roughshod over press freedoms. They're threatening criminal investigations. They detained my partner under a terrorism law. They forced the Guardian to destroy their laptops. So I am much more cautious about traveling to the UK, although not being able to visit the UK is not really something I regard as a particularly grave punishment.
Are you still in touch with Edward Snowden?
Sure, he's my source and somebody I care about, and I speak with him regularly.
You speak with him regularly, and how do you know how he is being treated, and how do you know, more importantly, whether he hasn't had to give up secrets if he's under Russian protection?
Because unlike the UK government and the US government, Mr. Snowden's statements have proven to be completely true in every single instance. I've never once seen him lie to me about anything. I know for a fact that he has protected the data that he has with extreme levels of encryption that not even the NSA, let alone the lesser Russian intelligence agencies, can crack. And he didn't unravel his life to fight surveillance in order to then go to the Russians and help them surveil.
No, but he has been through China, obviously in Hong Kong, and he's in Russia now. You can't be sure that he hasn't had to give up something.
Well, you pointed out very astutely just a few minutes ago that nobody can prove a negative. So if you're looking for me to prove to you mathematically that they don't have any data, I can't do that. What I can do is tell you that all of the evidence that we do actually know makes it ludicrous to think that they have obtained any of that data. There's zero evidence that they have, and any responsible journalist would refrain from suggesting that that happened when they have no evidence that it did.
I wonder, though, with Edward Snowden, whether or not his position in Russia, I mean, you know, if he tried to travel, look what happened, look what the Americans did, you know, to the presidential plane, the Bolivian presidential plane, over European territory. Does he really feel all that safe? The Russians have only said they'd keep him for a year.
Well, remember, he didn't choose to be in Russia. He was trying to pass through Russia, and the United States government basically forced him to be there by revoking his passport and preventing other countries from letting him transit through. But he certainly, given the alternative, which is a supermax prison in the United States where he's disappeared for the next 40 years, I think he's quite content to be where he is.
It's interesting, because this is, in some ways, elements of a spy film, because when you first met him, I understand that, how did you identify him when you first met him?
Right, I had no idea how old he was, who he was, what he looked like before I first met him, and so the plan was he had asked us to go to a part of the hotel where he was staying in at a designated time, and he said that he would enter that room and we would know him because he was carrying a Rubik's Cube. And we went at the designated time, he wasn't there, we came back at the second time that he had given us. He showed up a couple of minutes later carrying a Rubik's Cube, and that was how we knew that it was our source that we had been communicating.
So finally, I want to ask you, because we've gone from that kind of extraordinary kind of spy film thing to the idea that he actually might end up in an American supermax prison. Do you think ultimately he might indeed end up in an American prison?
Well, when we were in Hong Kong, he had assumed, I think we were all assuming, that that was going to be the likely outcome of the brave choice that he had made, which is what made it so brave. I think now it's a lot more difficult because his reporting is considered heroic by huge numbers of people around the world, and I think it's made it much more difficult for the US government to get their hands on him and basically disappear him and make it so that he's never heard from again.
Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much indeed.